I got 7 things tonight, by the way, just like I had 7 last time. So how do I overcome bad parenting? First, I cannot focus on what I did not receive and who was not present. I cannot focus on what I did not receive and on who was not present. One of the things, whenever someone asks me this question, and even the way the question was worded, how do I obtain what was never passed down? Okay? Can't focus on that. You can't focus on what you didn't receive, and you can't focus on who was not around. Now, I know that's difficult, but we're talking about how to overcome, right? In order to overcome, you can't focus on what you didn't have, because here's the thing. You don't know if you would have listened. There are plenty of us in here who had 2 wonderful parents, and we still, there you go. So you don't know whether or not you would have listened, okay? You don't know if you'd be better off. God may have been merciful to you and got them fools out your life. So you may be better off. You may have been worse off had they been around. You just don't know. That's why you can't focus on it, because you don't. Whenever you focus on what you didn't have or you didn't receive, you make it up in your mind. You can make it up in your mind to be anything. And the reality is, it may not have been what you think it was going to be, and you might not have even had. See, here's the thing. You say, if I had only had 2 good parents, you may not have had the heart to listen to good parents. So you don't know that you would be have all of these great life lessons, because you don't even know if you would have paid attention. Oh, I would have listened. You don't know that. You're assuming that based on what you think you didn't have, how badly you want it now, and translating it back to then when you were 12. See, you don't know what value would have been added. You just don't know. You can assume, but you don't know. You don't know how it may or may not have changed you. You don't know how it may or may not have changed you. You know, the guys up in Boston who allegedly blew up everybody with the bombs that were in their possession had a mom and a dad, raised by a mom and a dad, in a middle-class neighborhood, college educated. Some didn't go right. So you just don't know. And so since you don't know, and you can't know, and you'll never know, you can't focus on that. Because focusing on what you think you missed, what you think you lost, and what you think you didn't have is not going to help you now. See? Oh, I miss life lessons. You don't know that you miss life lessons. Oh, there are things I didn't get. You don't know you didn't get them. There are things I don't know. How do you know what you don't know if you don't know what you don't know? See? Because the question is, how do I obtain the teachings that were never passed down? But the person also in the question mentioned the fact that they were raised by their mother and their grandmother. So how do you know that what you got wasn't sufficient? And if you were raised by your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother, I think is the way they said it, then where did they get what they gave you? They probably got it from their parents, and they gave it to you. That means you did get something passed down. But because you're focusing on what you think you didn't get, you didn't acknowledge what you did get. Y'all starting to see what I'm saying? Which takes me to the second thing. I have to focus on who I did have and what I did receive. I have to focus on who I did have and what I did receive. See, I can't focus on what I didn't have and who I didn't have, but I need to focus as a young adult. What you have to do, one of the first things you have to do is kind of look and say, once you come into the knowledge of truth, who was in my life and what did they teach me? And what you will find is the people in your life taught you more than you thought. Now, look at 2 Timothy 1. Okay? Now, this is Timothy talking to Paul. Now, for all intents and purposes, Paul was more of a father to Timothy than Timothy's father. If you read most historical accounts, most exegetical studies, you will find out that Timothy's father was, by most accounts, in and out of his life at best. He was not a godly man. He did not believe in the things of God. And by most theologians' study, they find that Timothy was basically raised by his mother and his grandmother. And Paul, who is a later figure in Timothy's life, became a father figure to Timothy to really lead, guide, and direct him in the later days or the adult days of Timothy's life. Most of the time when we think of Timothy, we think of him as a very young man because we know that Paul was like his father figure. But Timothy was a fully grown man at the time that this letter was written. He wasn't 18. He was a bishop. So he was a fully grown man. He was probably closer to my age than those of you in this generation's age. He was a fully grown man. Paul was his father figure. His father was really not a factor in his life, and the persons who introduced him to God were his mother and his grandmother. Now, that makes Timothy a lot like a lot of people in this room tonight. Amen? Because in reality, or point of fact, for a lot of you in here, I am like a father figure in your life. Your father was in and out of your life at best, and the person who got you introduced to the Lord was a mama, a grandmama, and auntie. Fair enough? Amen. So, but Timothy was a bishop, so he turned out all right. Amen? So you can turn out all right even if your daddy wasn't all right. Notice Timothy's daddy is not mentioned in the book, so he's not the focus. The people who made him who he is in the book. Excuse my language, split a verb there, but you know what I meant. Okay? They are in the book. Verse number 5. Look at what Paul does. Paul does not call Timothy in remembrance of his father. He says, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother, Lois, and thy mother, Eunice, I am persuaded that in thee also, or that it is in you also. So what Paul does right away is says, I am persuaded that your mama and your grandmama's faith is what's in you and not your daddy. Now, see, that's backwards from what we do. We always point to the negative person and say, that's just like your. Huh? We find all the negative traits, point them out, and attach them to the person who's not doing their job. Paul said, wait. I'm going to look at what I like in you. You got it from your mama and your grandmama, and what you admire and respect in them, their unfeigned faith, that's in you also. I love the Bible. No matter who you are, is somebody in here like you. It says, wherefore, he says, I put you in remembrance that you stir up the gift of God, which is in thee, by the putting on of my hands. Now watch this. Most of us who grew up without parents, or one parent, or half a parent, or grandmama, or granddaddy, or somebody laid hands and prayed for us, and brought us to the house of the Lord. Come on now. That's why we're in here. See, I want to remind you, not of what you missed, I want to remind you of what you got. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Be not therefore ashamed of the testimony of the Lord, neither me his prisoner, but be thou a partaker of the affliction of the gospel according to the power of God. He's saying, listen, don't be ashamed of the testimony of God. Come on and walk with me in what God has called me to do and what God has called you to do. Listen, when you start to focus on who you did have and what you have received, it causes some things. First of all, it causes you to be grateful. And gratitude takes away anger and bitterness. Gratitude takes away anger and bitterness. See, when you start focusing on all of the people, teachers and family members and relatives and strangers in some cases, church members, when you start focusing on all the people who have invested in you and stop focusing on the people who you feel neglected you, it causes you to think in a way of gratitude. And when you start thinking in a way of gratitude, it starts to take away anger and bitterness. When I focus on who I didn't have and what I think I didn't receive, it causes me to perpetually live in anger or bitterness or disappointment or always looking for something that I think I'm missing. And if I'm in that state, I can't move forward because the will of God is always where? In front of us. It's never behind us. But when I start to look at what my grandmama told me, what my great-grandmother did for me, what my aunties and my uncles have done, what my church has done for me, what my pastor has taught me, the life lessons that God has bestowed on me. See, here's the thing. Don't worry about who taught you the lesson. Be grateful that you got it.